So welcome back. If you've already watched part one and part two, now hopefully you have a fundamental understanding as far as what GDR brings to the table. You saw me logically kind of explain the solution. You saw me in part two do the actual demonstration as far as moving resources or VMs from one site to another site, and then also to unmanage VMs and remanage the VMs to go ahead and move only slices of the environment. So, um, as I described the environments earlier in the prior recordings, I alluded to the fact that most clients are probably used to local mobility options. So I'm highlighting that on the left-hand side where they may be used to doing things like live partition mobility, things like simplified remote restart on our Power 8, Power 9, and Power 9 servers. And then beyond that, they may have local clustering solutions for high availability within the primary site. The goal here was to go ahead and go from site one to site two. How can I gain some type of mobility actions where I can ease the movement of VMs from one site to another site? Now, this won't be a live mobility operation, but it does effectively let me go ahead and take VMs that are hosted currently on the primary site and go ahead and relocate to the secondary site. So you can choose to do that manually. So we have some clients, and we've even done it ourselves in the lab, where we've got predefined profiles on the remote location, and we'll replicate the data. And whenever we want to go ahead and activate, we'll go ahead and activate them one at a time. That's okay if you're doing a handful of VMs. If you're doing a whole bunch of them, or if you want to kind of orchestrate it, it makes more sense to leverage a solution like GDR, where it's more orchestrated or semi-automated. You'll go ahead and have to go trigger the action, but it won't go ahead and trigger a movement operation for you automatically. As far as what workloads or which of the environments on the left-hand sides actually need to move, I also highlighted how you can manage and unmanage and how you can go ahead and slice the business. You could do an entire site move or you could do individual host groups. So you may be pairing up the hosts where I have the top left system and the top right system belonging to a host pair. In addition to that, I can go ahead and create a host group that says, I want to move only that slice of the business. So I don't, in the current release, I no longer have to move the entire site. I can do that, or I can do a slice of the business by breaking it up into actual host groups. As far as the available capacity on the remote location, I don't necessarily have to have apples to apples. So if I don't have the same amount of capacity available over there, I can go ahead and tell GDR, allow me to come online at the remote location, even if it's at degraded capacity. So bring me online at 70%, 60%, 50% capacity. I'll do a demonstration of that just shortly. And then if I had things like mobile activations and power enterprise pools, because I was using scale up boxes, they do provision a script that can help to orchestrate that piece before you initiate the GDR operation. So I'll highlight that. In my lab environment, I'm playing with scale outboxes, so I don't have the ability to manage enterprise pools in this particular setup, but I'll show you how you can go ahead and perform that in your environments as well with GDR. And then another thought here is if I'm moving VMs that work on the primary site in a specific network segment, when I go ahead and I relocate them, the IPs are probably not going to work on the remote location, or it may be a completely different network segment altogether. So what types of things does GDR provision to go ahead and allow me to allow those VMs to work either in an isolated fashion or pick up a new identity when they come online in the remote location? Also, testing. How do I go ahead and perform testing? It's okay if I can relocate from one site to the other site, but that would require the VMs to actually come offline. So that would be an interruption of service. Can I go ahead and perform that? Or can I leverage any extra features within the tool that will let me do it in a non-disruptive fashion? So there's a nice feature that will effectively tell GDR to spawn off a clone on the remote location without any impact to the production machines. So I'll continue to operate on the production site, initiate the DR test operation. I can test away on isolated VMs at the remote location and not have any impact. And whenever I'm done, I can initiate a cleanup and it'll go ahead and delete those clones automatically. So again, if I'm doing this at scale, it's a lot easier than having to pre-provision mappings and go ahead and manipulate the storage myself for one VM at a time. So for starters, I'll show you how I'm going to go ahead and alter the processor and memory allocations for my VMs. There's different levels of granularity at which you can go ahead and make the tuning. So you can do it at the VM level, the host level, or at the host group level. In my particular scenario, I'm going to go ahead and make the modification and tweak it at the host level. So I'll do a demonstration of that where I'll initiate a GDR move operation from the primary site to the secondary site and have the VMs come online at half the capacity. Both processors and memory will get sliced in half. And then on the bottom, I'm showing that you can go ahead and pre-provision mobile activations on the remote location before you initiate the GDR operation. So from the GDR side of the house, they did introduce a command that can help you pre-provision those resources at the remote location. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go ahead and manipulate the memory and CPU values, and let's get to it. So now that I showed you what I was going to be performing logically, let's go ahead and do the actual demonstration. So what I've got open here is I've got a window open on the top left to my cases controller. On the top right, I've got an HMC window open to the secondary site. So you'll see that it's called ATSSG17. ATSSG16 on the bottom right, he is the HMC for the primary location. Currently, my host group is hosted there. You'll notice that the 6 VMs actually show up there. And then on the bottom left, I've got a diagram of what the environment looks like that I've been playing with in recordings 1 and 2. So this is just a continuation of the same exact environment. As far as the allocations for the current systems, I had highlighted them logically before, but if we look from the HMC, you'll notice that my DB instances for RHEL have 96 gigs of memory, the app servers have 32 gigs, and then it's the same thing for SLES. So the two app servers are 32, and then the two DB SLES instances are 96 gigs. As far as the processor allocations, each one of them has a single processor allocated. So what I want to do is slice all of the VMs in half. So I want half a processor, and I want to slice the memory in half for each one of the different ones when I perform the movement operation. So for starters, let me show you how the cases manager actually sees the hosts. So I've got host number 2 showing up first, and the reason I know that is because it says site secondary. And on the bottom, you see the primary site. This is the actual host right here. Let me go ahead and highlight them because I'm going to need them in the follow-on command. And then what you'll notice is that the CPU and memory capacity are currently set to none. So this is where at the host level I can go ahead and make a modification and specify a percentage. So just I picked a random number and I said let's go ahead and slice the resources in half. It should be easy to see. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we'll do a cases manager modify host, and I had captured that particular name, and we'll do CPU capacity equal to, let's say, 50%, and it'd be nice if I spelt it right. 50, and then let's go ahead and do the memory capacity equal to half as well. And there's also these other flags, so I can do a skip power on, and I can go ahead and set that one to yes, and I can also do a skip resource check equal to yes. Now these are completely optional, but since I'm doing a number of tests going back and forth, I can expedite the movement by not letting the VMs come all the way online. I already showed that they can come online when I did the GDR plan moves and recording number 2. So let me go ahead and set it this way. I don't have to wait nearly as long, and that change should be immediate. So cases manager query host, same command I ran before, and you'll notice that for this particular host, I'm basically telling it that if I relocate the contents of that particular host, drop my CPU and memory capacity by down to 50%. So I've already done a discovery and verification previously, so I can go ahead and do a cases manager move from our move site from primary to secondary, and now we'll just tee it off, and I'll probably go ahead and fast forward. Okay, and the operation just finished. You'll see that all of the VMs got relocated. I purposely set them to not go ahead and get activated when they moved, so that way I saved a little bit of time. But the important piece, and if I scroll to the right hand side, is that because I had specified for those resources or for that host, if he got relocated, to basically get sliced in half, you'll see that the memory allocation is now half for the DB instances and also half for the application servers. And then as far as the processor allocations, it went ahead and brought them online with half a processor allocated versus one. Now, if I go ahead and I initiate a plan moved back to the primary, they will automatically go back to the whole values. So I'll go ahead and I'll do that real quick. And all I have to do to go ahead and get back is secondary. And I'll move back from the secondary back to the primary. Okay, and now you can see that the movement operation back from the secondary completed, moving back to the primary. If you pay attention on the bottom right, you'll notice that it did not go ahead and skip the power on because I only had it set to go one way. So it did go ahead and start activating those VMs. They're still in the process of booting up, but the important pieces are this. It brought me back to the processor and memory allocations that I had before. And if I go ahead and I scroll to the right so that you can see the memory values, it went ahead and basically doubled the memory and doubled the processors. So it's as easy as that to do modifications of your resources when you're initiating a GDR move from one location to another location. So now that I showed you the ability to manipulate the processor and memory values with the GDR move, I'll cover the DR test feature that was introduced in the 1.2.1 release. This one, I think it brings in a huge value add as far as what GDR brings into the mix. And in order for you to kind of understand what's taking place, I'd figure I'd take you back to the diagram and then I'll go ahead and I'll perform the actual demonstration. So here's the same environment that I'm playing with. And we've been talking about the consistency group and the mobility of those managed VMs on the left-hand side from one site to another site. Now, what this new feature brings into the mix is if I go ahead and I define a third set of volumes on the bottom right, I can basically establish a point in time copy, and I can have GDR create a clone that will not have any type of impact on the production that I can test with. So the way that this works is my same discovery operation that I would do when I initially discover the VMs from the systems. I can do the same thing, but do a DR test equals yes. So basically append to the syntax. What that did is that initiated a flash copy or a point in time copy on the very bottom right from those target volumes over to the third set of LUNs that I have provisioned on the back end. I can do a validation of the configuration. So the same verify command that I ran earlier, all that I did was append that dr underscore test equals yes. And then what that will do is that'll leave me set up so I can initiate the actual move operation. Again, I'm doing a DR test operation, and when I perform that operation, he's going to now go ahead and create a duplicate set of VMs, so effectively a clone of the source VMs with the same capacity if I'd let it do the same thing. But it's going to be leveraging those flash copy targets volumes. So he's not going to have any type of impact on the very source production environment on the left-hand side. Now, while those test VMs are in place, the one thing that I can't do is I can no longer do a planned GDR move until I clean up that environment. So I can have an indefinite test period amount of time. So I can test away as long as I want. And then whenever I'm ready to clean this up, it'll go ahead and automatically delete those VMs. Now, some of the things here is earlier in the previous recordings, I had done a cases manager query system, but I hadn't really focused on the details. So here, if you take a look, there are network mapping policies that you can specify where you can effectively say, if I do a GDR move from one site to the other site, for my VLAN map and my vSwitch map, go ahead and have the VMs come online in a different network segment. I can also do it for just when I do the DR test option. So you see that on the very bottom, the DR VLAN map and the DR vSwitch map. In my environment, I do not have them set. I can show you how to set them, but I don't have the physical cabling for me to go ahead and test this feature. So I can still create the clones as soon as I bring them online because I have no network mappings in place. I would effectively start getting duplicate IP error messages because I would have the same VMs online at the same time, same names, same IPs, unless I went ahead and I modified the environment. So on the right-hand side, I'm showing that they could be in a completely isolated network. The features that you get within GDR are kind of twofold. I can specify the network mapping at that level. I can also prime the VMs, so if they know that they're getting booted on the left-hand side or site, they would come online with one identity, and then if they boot up on the right-hand side, they can also come online with a different identity as well. Now, whenever I get ready to go ahead and perform the cleanup operation, simple command. So step number 4 up on the top, it's as easy as running a cases manager cleanup site primary, and then DR test also appended to it. What that'll do is that'll go ahead and clean up the VMs, and I'm right back to where I started. So maybe I perform another plain discovery, plain verification, and then do the actual movement without the DR test if I wanted to go back to a scenario where I was doing plan moves again, or maybe it was an unplanned move if I had an actual site failure. So the configuration is kind of twofold. One of them is setting up the storage, and then the other one is setting up the network mappings. From the storage side of the house, earlier in the recording number 2, I showed you a view of the LUNs that I actually had configured. In addition to those LUNs, and I went ahead and I not only provisioned the first set of LUNs for each of the VMs, so there I'm kind of highlighting for VM1 the boot aux LUN, which was effectively the target LUN for the replication from site 1 over to site 2. In addition to that, I went ahead and I assigned a third LUN. Now these sets of LUNs reside on the target subsystem. If you look on the top left, this is a view from my V9000 subsystem. So I provisioned one, and I happen to call him dr underscore test on the tail end to reflect that he's effectively going to be my flash copy LUN. He is not mapped to a host. So if you look on the very right hand side, you see that the capacity is identical, but it's not mapped to a host. Only the aux would be basically mapped to a host. And then I could continue to go down the line, and beyond the boots, I have the work LUNs or my data LUNs specified there. And if I had animated the remainder of the picture, you would have seen the same thing for VM2, VM3, VM4, all the way up to VM6, as well as the shared LUNs that I was using for my disk fencing. So I have to provision the LUNs, and then beyond that, I have to establish relationships between those LUNs. So far we've been talking about the first consistency group that gets automatically built. Now, if I want to leverage the DR test option, I can go ahead and create those LUNs, but I need to establish a relationship. And I can do that two ways. One of them is to have that relationship be established as a snapshot copy. That's effectively just pointers on the back end. So if any changes were to take place, then it would write the bit on the back end, and then as soon as I do the cleanup, it goes ahead and it deletes that relationship, so nothing stays on those target LUNs. The other one is to do a full clone, where it's effectively going to initiate the flash copy and duplicate the contents of those volumes onto the flash copy target LUNs. So that's what I'm doing for my test environment. I'm creating a clone copy of all of the LUNs, and the way that I initiated that operation, from the cases controller or the VM itself, I executed an SSH as admin to my V9000, and I did the SVC tasks specifying the source LUN and then the target LUN. Notice that it's got DR test in the name with a copy rate of 100. And I did that for the first boot LUN, for the work LUN or the data LUN, and then I proceeded down the line and I did it for the remaining LUNs for all of the environments. So I had a total of 14 source LUNs, and then I duplicated that. So I had 14 DR test targets. I established the relationships, and now I'm ready to go ahead and test away. Now, beyond that, if I wanted to modify the network mapping policy, I can do it at various levels, just like I could do with the processor and memory modifications. I could do it at the system level, the site level, the host group level, or the individual VMs. So for the particular test that I'll be doing, or the demonstration, I'll be making the modification at the system level. So first I'm going to do the test where I don't have any type of network mapping policy in place, and then I'm going to go ahead and make the modification at the system level. I'm not going to initiate the move after I make that network mapping policy because, again, I don't have the physical cabling in place to be able to facilitate the creation of the virtual NICs on the target site. If I were to probe around the environment and I did a cases manager query system, or if you were poking around in your own cases controller, that's how you would go ahead and display if it was actually set. And then effectively what you're doing is you're setting up a matrix that says if The workloads or the VMs exist on site 1, use this VLAN. If they exist on the second site, use the second VLAN. And notice that I kind of staggered the numbers. So VLAN 1 on site 1, VLAN 11 on the right hand side, so forth and so forth. Same thing for the vSwitches. So now let's go ahead and get to it and perform the actual DR test operation. Okay, so now that I showed you what the feature was, let's go ahead and actually do it. So same exact windows that I had showing up a little bit earlier. So let's go ahead and do a cases manager query disk pair. And this is going to look different than what I showed in the previous recordings because earlier I didn't have the targets configured in the previous recordings. When I added this third set of disks, now you can see how there's a third copy going from the target volumes on the right hand side. So that would be these guys going to my flash copy volume. So those are the relationships that I had actually established. If I do cases manager query system, here we can see how I do not have any network mapping in place, even though it's actually enabled. And then for my previous test, I do not have the, let's see, cases manager query host. From my previous test, my skip power on, it's still set to yes. So because I don't have the network mapping policy actually set, and I would effectively be creating a clone with the same exact IPs and the same flat network, I would be getting all sorts of duplicate IP error messages. I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of that setting as before. Also, I left the CPU and memory values set to 50%. So when I initiate the DR test operation, that clone should be coming online with half the capacity at the same time as my production VMs are online. So if I look on the bottom, all of those guys are actually actively running. And let's go ahead and initiate the operation. So I'll do it from the ground up. I'll do a cases manager, discover site primary, DR test equals yes. And same thing here. Oh, you got to be able to type. I may have to fast forward if this winds up taking a little bit long, just to speed up the recording. The verification I know will be quick, but for the discovery piece, I'll probably skip ahead and then initiate the move. And you'll basically see that the VMs will get duplicated when I initiate the move operation. And if you look, the discovery operation completed. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, same syntax, but I'll initiate a verification. And that one should be very quick. So it's just going to validate that this teed off, that it's got the proper LUNs. That one is now complete. And now I can do a cases manager move site from primary to secondary, and we'll do a DR test equals yes. And this is the operation that's actually going to go ahead and create the clone. So I'll fast forward just so you don't have to wait for the operation to complete. But what you will see is the VMs on the bottom will stay online. We should have absolutely no impact to those guys. And then we should have clones getting created up on top. And notice that it's giving me a warning. Have you isolated the network in a different way since it's not detecting that I have a network map in place? And I'm going to say yes, even though I have the skip power on set to yes so that the VMs won't get actually booted up. I've done it both ways. I just want to avoid the duplicate IP error messages. And if you look, the operation just literally completed. Now, one of the things I did to kind of expedite things is I set the power on setting to basically no, so that the VMs, even though they got created, they did not get booted, so I didn't have to wait for the actual boot time. But because I had done the previous test where I basically set the CPU and memory settings to come online with half, you'll notice that production stayed online on the bottom. I had no impact. They stayed at full size on the source, And then on the target, they came online at half capacity. Same thing with my processing units. Had I let them boot, they would have come online with only half a processor and then half the memory. Now I can test away, assuming I'm in an isolated environment without any impact to production. The one thing is that I cannot do a planned GDR move while I'm in this state. I'm basically in a DR test mode. So whenever I'm done, cleanup would be as simple as cases manager, cleanup site primary, and then I want to specify the DR test equals to yes. As soon as I do this, it would try to do a shutdown. They're already offline, so I don't have to wait for that piece. And once it recognizes that they're offline, it'll go ahead and start deleting them. So I'll be right back to where I started. And if you look, you'll notice that the cleanup was faster, but it wiped out the profile definitions up from the top HMC, operation completed, and now I'm right back to where I started. So if I wanted to do a move, more than likely I would do a discovery verification and then initiate the move if it was a planned move. If I wanted to spawn off another DR test, same thing, just go through that same logical type of flow. I did not set a network mapping policy earlier, but if I was going to go ahead and set it, I would do a cases manager modify system, and I mentioned I was going to do it at the system level. So I can do a two-pass approach. Network equals VLAN map sites, and I had called my sites primary and secondary. And then if I was going to alter my VLAN, I could say for my primary, I know right now it's actually set to 10. For my secondary VLAN, let's go ahead and set them to 11. And we'll do it for the DR test option. So if I go ahead and set that one, it'll go ahead and you'll notice that my DR VLAN map got set to 10/11, so home and backup. I could just as easily come in, do the same thing, for the vSwitch. So let's go ahead and modify that attribute, and we'll do vSwitch map. And this one, I know that I am using vSwitch 0, so on the secondary, I would probably use vSwitch 1. Try to follow the same naming convention, and you would see how I could set the map policy for whenever I perform the DR test operations. Now, if I wanted to go ahead and remove that policy, it's as easy as coming to the end and doing a policy equals delete. And I removed the DR VLAN map. And let's remove the other one. And it's as simple as that. You'll see that the policies are no longer set. So let's go ahead and move on to the last part of the recording. Now that I did the actual demonstrations, the last couple pieces I wanted to leave you with are some of the extra features. So if you look inside of the opt IBM cases directory, you'll see that there's some samples in there. They've provided samples to prime the VMs or the LPARs. So you can go ahead and have it discover the information that's actually on the VM. It'll create a failover config file that you can go ahead and modify. So you could have that setup DR corn shell script go ahead and effectively prime the VM on boot so that it sets the network structure and the naming convention that you want for that VM whenever he comes online on the secondary location. So that's available for AIX. They have not included it for the Linux side, but that is something that our lab services team could actually assist with. And then by default, it will go ahead and do a nightly discovery. We do probing or lightweight probing or checking once an hour, but the deeper one is actually done nightly by default at midnight. And then we do have notifications available that I'll show you in just a sec. So let me go ahead and go back to the environments, and I'll show you those pieces. Okay, and as I was mentioning the sample scripts, let me go ahead and show you that. So if I cd into opt IBM cases, that's where you from second from the bottom, that's where you'll find the samples directory. So I can cd into samples. You'll see the site specific stuff. So if I take a look in there, I mentioned that the sample scripts are available for AIX. They have not released them for Linux yet, but that is something that our lab services team can assist with. And then if you look inside here, you'll see the data collection script, the failover config file that you can go ahead and modify, and then the setup DR scripts. These are well documented in the documentation in the available Redbook, which was based on the older version of GDR, but certainly available to you. The last piece that I wanted to show you is the actual notification. So by default, the notification is set to low. So if I do a cases manager query system, and we saw this earlier, here is the nightly discovery that it'll perform at midnight. And if you look at the notification level, the default is low. So in low, it's going to show you any type of critical or error events. If you set it to medium, it'll show you critical and warning events. And if you set it to high, it'll show you informational, critical, and warning events. So let me kind of show you what you get. Type equals error. These are the types of failures that you would get notified on. And then if I were to go ahead and modify this and set it to warning, those are the warning messages that you would get an email on. And then let's take a look at the informational ones. So you see the various types of messages. If I want to go ahead and make a modification to my system, I can do a cases manager modify system and level, and let's go ahead and set them equal to high. And there's my query system. Oh, be nice if I didn't typo it. And you see my notification level now has been set to high. The other things that you can go ahead and configure, you could do a cases manager notify contact. I won't bother showing you how to actually set this, but I've already defined my name, my email address, my coworkers, or one of my coworkers' names and email address, so that we both get notifications anytime that the cases reports any of the messages. If I wanted to go ahead and configure my own types of events, I could easily do that as well. So I could do a cases manager, add notify, and then specify the path of the event that I wanted to go ahead and get notified on. So let's say full path, and then to the events, I would add the event itself that I wanted to get notification on, and I would give him whatever name I wanted to. I won't bother setting anything now, but let me flip to back to one last chart, and from there we'll wrap up. So the last piece that I wanted to leave you with was basically the messages that I indicated, the type error, type warning, and type info. And if you were to start getting the emails, this is what you would see. Rather than loading up my entire inbox, I just wanted to show you examples. This is where I had a mirror relationship failure. This one was a daily verification that was completed. And then finally, this one was one that I could not access the HMC because it was being upgraded on the back end. So I got a temporary message indicating that, and then I got a message when it was restored. So this was the more advanced video. Hopefully you learned a lot more, and you saw the nice value add features of being able to manipulate the CPU and memory values during the GDR movement operation, and then also that DR test operation that lets you effectively have the solution create a clone so that you can test away without any type of impact to production. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us.